She set the pail on his porch and said, "We'll take the barn." Sable Whitlow kept her hands open, palms up, so he wouldn't mistake need for a trick. The two boys sagged against the porch post behind her, boots unlaced, trusting her to hold when the world didn't. "We don't ask for charity," she added, voice scraped thin by miles and by what she refused to name. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you." The man who opened the door wasn't old, though the set of his shoulders tried to be. Ranch dust silvered his dark hair at the temple like first winter at the edge of fall. He looked from Sable's face to the sleeping boys, and then to the pail, milk still warm from a cow someone else had trusted her with down the road. "Jericho Bram," he said, as if laying down a card but not the whole hand. "You're late to the valley for winter work. I'm shorter on hired help than sense, but even I know a lie when it comes dressed as pride. There's a bottle calf bawling in my barn like the end of days. You feed her, you can argue rooms after." Sable bit back the thank you. Gratitude came last. Work first. "I can feed a hungry thing." He half smiled, brief and slanted, then lifted one boy, Kit at 12, suddenly light now that he'd stopped insisting he wasn't, and carried him inside without asking. Sable's stomach clenched at the sight of a stranger's arms around her blood, but Kit, his head tucked under Jericho's jaw, as if he'd been there before. The man moved careful, like a horseman bringing a skittish mare through a gate. The other boy, Brant, snored once, and then scowled in his sleep, which meant he was dreaming of something unfair. Sable slid an arm under his knees and another behind his back. Brant's fingers closed around the ribbon at her throat. The knot wasn't pretty, but it held. She followed Jericho's shadow through the doorway into a room lit only by coals banked low. The house smelled like cedar chips and saddle soap. "Spare bed," he said. "You don't argue about sheets when a kid's already half asleep." "I'll argue," Sable said, though softer now. "After the calf." Jericho thumbed toward the back door, toward the barn's dark profile against a darker yard. "This way." Sable didn't ask why a man who'd just met them was offering the big bed when any bunk or corner of a kitchen would do. She understood, bone deep, that some men kept their kindness under lock like ammunition, counting it by bullets. Others, rarer, treated mercy like water. What you poured saved you too. Jericho felt like the second kind. She didn't trust it yet. Trust took proof, but she followed him to the barn. The calf had a cry like a small, furious trumpet. Sable stepped into the warm animal breath and was home quicker than any map could deliver. The bottle rattled on a shelf. She tested the milk on the inside of her wrist without thinking, then knelt into straw. The calf butted her palm, hungry as a storm. "Easy," Sable murmured. "You eat, we stay. That's the bargain." Jericho lingered by the stall door, arms crossed, watching as if she were a card trick he was trying not to be impressed by. "You talk to cattle like they read the good book." "They listen better than most folks," Sable said, tilting the bottle. "This one lose her dam?" "He 2 nights ago," Jericho answered. "Dam was old, calf came hard. I'm not much for surrender, but I can tell when a fight's righteous and when it's cruelty dressed up like grit. I cut my losses. Been paying interest to the bawling ever since." The calf's pull at the rubber made Sable's wrist throb, a good ache, a living one. She fed large lives with small, sure motions, and the world steadied. "Kit can help at dawn," she said. "He can string wire or carry water. Brant can pick chicken eggs with his pockets turned out so he does not break what he steals." Jericho's mouth twitched. "You offering me a crew or a family?" Sable didn't flinch. "Both earn their keep." They worked the stall until the bottle drained and the calf's eyelids softened. Sable wiped the rubber clean on the hem of her skirt and set the bottle upside down to dry. Only then did she turn and really look at the man offering her trouble and shelter in the same breath. He had rope burns old enough to fade and a left hand that didn't quite straighten all the way. Loss had lived here a while. It didn't make him cruel. It had made him careful. You asked for the barn, Jericho said, and you earned the whole house. Try the big bedroom. Sable shook her head once, then again because her heart tried to betray her. Floor by their bed, she said. If they wake, they need to see me before they see your ceiling. He didn't argue. He only lifted a lantern and led them back through the kitchen where a kettle waited on a cooling iron. He poured water into a cup and set it near Sable's elbow. You talk when you're ready, he said. Not because anyone tilted the cup. Sable's fingers wrapped around the warm tin as if it would burn away the memory of another man. Tally marks. Feed. Ode. Miles left names she refused to say aloud, lest they summon themselves like snakes. She swallowed heat and gave him the bare arithmetic. Father died in August, she said. Left a debt that refused to die with him. A foreman down valley got a taste for collecting children to balance books, said boys work cheap. I disagreed. Jericho's eyes cooled in the careful way of men who had learned not to let fury run the whole team. Name. Rance Lyle, she said, saying it made the cup taste tinny. He'll come, if he hasn't already. Paper or no, he'll come. Jericho nodded once, as to a truth that had already sat at his table. He came years ago, after my brother's widow couldn't pay fence posts with the memory of love. He took her milk cow and left a prayer card. I like to think the Lord refuses such prayers on principle. You sent him away? I sent him with a broken knuckle and a story for his boss, Jericho said. Didn't fix the world. Helped my house. He tipped his chin toward the boys' room. That's my first duty. Sable blinked. Your children. My sisters, he said. She followed her husband west, then followed him into the ground when lightning found him on the ridge. I said yes, because there was no other answer I could look at my own face and live with. Sable understood that yes, it was the kind that stitched you to a life and didn't ask if your hands were ready. Then we won't upset your order. We'll be gone as soon as... As soon as what? Jericho asked, not unkindly. As soon as the coast is clear enough that the boys Dante get dragged back by law made for men like Lyle, Sable said, testing the words like wire for weak spots. Or, and the thought landed with its own weight, as soon as we make it clear they were not his to take. Jericho's gaze cut to the door, then to the window. He moved quiet to the pegboard and lifted an old Winchester down like a memory. He didn't chamber around. He just held the rifle across his forearm the way a man might hold a baby, respectful, aware of power. Sleep, he said. I'll sit a while. Sable laid herself on a braided rug beside the bed the boys now shared. Kit had rolled, taking all the blanket like he was entitled. Brant had balled himself small, ferocious even in rest. She tucked them both, pulled her shawl tight, and let the smell of cedar and sleep pull her close. Outside, the gate latch clicked, then clicked again. Jericho didn't move. He had the kind of stillness that wasn't laziness, but a coiled decision. She dreamed without pictures, which for Sable was the kindest mercy. Morning came like a hand on the shoulder, firm, insistent. She woke to her own name spoken softly. Miss Whitlow. Jericho stood in the doorway, hat in hand. Dawn had a way of making truth simpler. Plans. Feed first, Sable said, rising. Calf will be hungry. Jericho's mouth tilted. I meant after breakfast. Sable tied her hair with the ribbon Brant had held and made a list fast enough to outrun fear. We go to town, find the sheriff when he's already had his coffee. We put the boys' names in a book that says they're not up for sale. We sign, if we must, papers that mean something when waved under noses. Jericho nodded. We'll take the wagon. Looks less like trouble than 3 alone on foot. He hesitated. You sure you want to walk your fight into the street? Lyle is fire that loves wind. Running is wind's cousin, Sable said. I'm done with cousins. He laughed, low and brief, then turned it into a cough as if the sound embarrassed him. Eat, he said, and left them a plate. biscuits split and buttered, jam like a red sunrise. Sable didn't ask how long the jar had sat waiting for guests who didn't come. She fed the boys first, watching the colour return to Kit's skin and the suspicion leave Brant's eyes as sugar worked its piece. While they chewed, she taught them the day's script. If a man speaks to you like you're less, you answer like you're more, she said. If a law speaks like it owns you, you ask whose hand wrote it and who it serves. You keep your chin level and your hands unclenched. The first fight is to keep your own shape. Kit nodded, like he was memorizing figures. Brant wrinkled his nose. If the law tries to touch you, he asked. Then your hands are mine, Sable said, and mine know how to hold. They hitched the wagon. The calf bawled, reminding Sable that some promises couldn't keep to a clock. She ran a bottle out and fed quickly, hand steady, mind already in town. Jericho watched from the shadow of the barn, face unreadable, until she pushed the nipple past the calf's stubborn grievance. Then his mouth softened again, pride not in her, but in the way work straightens a world. On the road into town, cottonwoods lined the creek like a column of tired soldiers. Sable didn't look at the water. Looking at water made you count how far you could go without drinking, and counting like that had never yet saved her. She kept her eyes on the ruts ahead and the dust, and on Jericho's hands on the reins, which were firm but gentle, as if he had learned you could steer anything with the right pressure and the right promise. "You got people here?" he asked. "Had," Sable said. "They took up with a preacher who likes overflow more than his own brim. When I wouldn't confess to sins I didn't own, he prayed me out of the house and into the road. That was back in Dry Comet. Different sheriff, same him." Jericho looked sideways. "I don't ask this to be cruel. What is so hard about confessing what men want to hear?" Sable held his gaze. "Because the next confession is your name, and the one after that is your boy's." He didn't ask again. Men who respected boundaries without understanding them were rare as rain in August. She marked it as a kind of wealth. Town lay in a shallow saddle where two trails crossed and refused to yield, so they shared a street. General store, blacksmith, hotel with a porch full of talkers, sheriff's office set back as if embarrassed by its own work. Jericho reined in by the hitching rail. Sheriff Tolliver had a mustache like a broom and a way of speaking that made even compliments feel like warnings. He stood when Jericho walked in and tipped his hat when Sable followed, then noticed the boys and added a sigh, as if children made the world an administrative burden. "Jericho," Tolliver said, "and Miss Sable Whitlow, Kit Whitlow, Brant Whitlow," Jericho supplied faster than Sable could. "They're under my roof, under my watch." Tolliver's eyes slid to Sable. "You vouch for him vouching for you?" Sable didn't blink. "I vouch for me. He vouches for his gate." Tolliver made a pencil appear. "There's a paper men like to wave that says minor children can be indentured to a man who claims them a burden on the county," he said. "Law wasn't written to help orphans, was written to help men who own ink. Tell me your concern." "Rance Lyle," Sable said. "He'll come with a paper he bought from a clerk's lost conscience." Tolliver's jaw moved. "He's on my nerves like a fly that thinks my nose is home. He stays just this side of arrest by wearing a Sunday face on a Monday heart. I can write down the boys' names as wards of decent protection, not adoption, not indenture. It ain't gold, but it shines enough to blind a bully from 10 paces. "Do it," Jericho said. The pencil rasped. The names clicked into the book like stones laid into a short wall. It wouldn't stop a flood, but it would turn some water. Tolliver blew on the ink and ripped a copy for Sable to fold into her bodice. "Lyle'll test it," he warned. "He always does." Sable felt the paper warm against her sternum, felt her breath return to a part of her chest that had been empty for months. "Good," she said. "I came to be tested." They made it back to the wagon with only a handful of stairs that Sable knew how to pocket and spend later as fuel. Jericho lifted Brant as if the boy weighed less than the worry he carried. Kit climbed like a man rehearsing adulthood. Jericho's hand was there without asking, and Kit used it without pretending he didn't need it. Sable climbed up last. She was settling onto the plank when a voice slid through the noon heat like a knife under a knot. "Miss Whitlow," it said, pleasure and threat braided. Rance Lyle had a hat 2 sizes too proud and a suit coat that called itself respectable because it had 2 buttons. He leaned a shoulder against the hotel post with the ease of a man who liked to let other people do the walking. 2 men in dusters stood just behind him, faces that could be interchangeable for a catalogue of hired help. "Rance," Sable said. She let his name be a thing she set down, not a thing she picked up. "You forget your debt," he said, a cruel smile on his face. "I remember who owns it," Sable replied, "and it's not you." Rance chuckled, threatening to take her boys. "Count mine twice," Jericho said, his voice calm. But the rifle across his knees spoke volumes. Rance backed down for now, leaving a slip of paper and a promise to return. Jericho simply said, "Home." The ride back was a quiet understanding. The ranch wasn't just land, it was a sanctuary. Work became a shield against fear. Sable watched her boys, protecting them with a quiet strength that calmed both child and animal. Jericho watched her, seeing more than just a woman in trouble. That evening, over a simple meal, a new foundation was built. Jericho offered her a future. "When this is over," he said, "you'll need a plan. I've got work. Wages slow but honest." Sable was wary. "You don't know me." He met her gaze. "I know what you didn't do with a bully. Sometimes that's enough to start. I'm going to stand beside your fight." It wasn't a promise, but something more real. A path forward, together. Rance's smile trembled, only a little. "That book is a preference, not a law," he said. "This is law." He shook his paper as if noise could become authority. Jericho leaned one shoulder against the frame, a mirror to the pose Rance had worn in town. "You step on my floor with that lie in your hand," he said, and now he was done with pleasant, "and you do it knowing you chose to make me your teacher. I'm patient with calves and children. I'm not patient with men who bill themselves as storms." The 2 dusters moved, a shift in the dark like wolves deciding on direction. Sable measured the room, counted how long it would take to fling herself between the boys and the doorway if steel flashed, counted whether her body could be a wall that would hold. She felt her own courage like a raw thing and held it anyway. "Tomorrow," Rance said, which is what cowards say when they want to hear themselves promise ruin. "I'll come tomorrow with a deputy who knows which side of a badge faces out." He stepped backward, the porch plank complaining under his weight. "Sleep light, Bram." The night re-knit itself around his absence. The door closed. Jericho slid the bolt. Sable's knees went weak only after the sound of hooves faded into a geography her fear didn't T-map. "He'll bring the deputy," Jericho said, voice flat. "We meet them in the yard. Boys behind you. I'll take the left, you the right. If ink fails, we have truth. If truth fails, we have time. If time fails, we have each other's names. And I've found that even a coward hesitates before trying to steal that." Sable stared at him until her eyes blurred and he became a man-shaped kindness, dangerous and necessary. She wanted to say yes to staying. Yes to the job he hadn't quite offered. Yes to a life that didn't require her to turn herself into iron every morning. She couldn't say any of it yet. She could only say, "I'll brew coffee before dawn." He nodded once, as if she had said all the other things, and he had heard them anyway. Dawn began as a rumor. Sable woke to birds insulting each other and to the smell of beans boiling over. She gathered the boys from the closet where they had slept the late part of the night and kissed each crown without calling it a kiss. In the kitchen, she found Jericho already there, hands wrapped around a mug as if warming them before work. They ate stood-up bread and called it toast, swallowed coffee that delivered courage on schedule. Sable packed the paper from the sheriff into her bodice again and tucked her ribbon under her collar, so there was nothing small for a bully to grab. Jericho checked the latch on the yard gate twice and the rifle once. "Ready?" he asked. "Born," Sable said. They stepped onto the porch as the sun climbed the edge of the world. Everything was edges then, of light, of law, of what people believed they could take from each other. Sable turned to wake the boys and found the bed empty, the blanket folded back, the window sash lifted 2 inches. Tiny prints in the silt by the sill led out. One set bare, one set in socks, dragging where someone had moved too fast. The ribbon she tied at her throat lay on the floor, cut clean through. From the gate a voice called, pinched and pleased. "Rance Lyle." "Bring me the older one," he said, "and the young rancher keeps his stock." This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. Sable stepped toward the gate and said, "You touch him, I'm done talking." Rance Lyle stood with one hip resting against the rail as if a man could lean his way into ownership. Kit was beside him, not bound, not bruised, just held by the particular trap that looks like concern when it's really calculation. One of Rance's men had a palm on Kit's shoulder, 2 fingers pressing a point that hurts enough to promise more. The other duster had his hand near his coat, where a piece of metal waited to make a mess and call it order. Jericho stepped off the porch with the slow care of a surgeon who knows the cut will bleed no matter what. He didn't lift the rifle. He didn't have to. Men can smell a trap that's willing to be polite. If he leaves with you, he leaves with a crime attached, Jericho said. "You ready to carry that weight to dinner?" Rance's smile tilted wider. A man advertising confidence he kept in hock. "Boy climbed out the window on his own," he said, spreading his hands. "Some children go toward better opportunities the way a thirsty man goes to a creek. I'm just gathering strays so the county don't have to." "Let him speak," Sable said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Rance turned his head as if he were a gentleman granting favors by the pinch. "Go on then, Kit. Tell your guardian how you were thinking on a future." Kit swallowed, then squared his jaw the way men in his line did when a wall needed building from inside. "Brant was still asleep," he said. "I heard your boot on the porch. I thought if you took me, you'd leave him. I thought you'd settle for one. I didn't think you'd ask permission." He looked straight at Sable as if a hill were being climbed with only a stair for rope. "I'm sorry I moved without you." Sable let pride and fear make a fist and then unclench. "You moved like a brother," she said. "You don't apologize for that. You apologize for underestimating me." Kit nodded once, accepting his share. The duster's grip tightened. Sable saw the pain jump along Kit's arm and land behind his eyes. A small thing to some, but small things are how cruelty practices for the big show. Rance flapped the paper again, its edges frilled from being waved too often. "This says the boys can be placed," he declared, tone all courtroom and no law. "This says they'll learn a trade, earn a bunk, and stop being a drain on men who haul their own weight." "Trade you for a truth," Sable said, stepping nearer until the sun cut a slice between them, like a witness. "You place boys where the hands in your ledger need more hands on their shovels. You collect a finder's fee and call it virtue. The drains you fear are the ones that empty the pool you drink from." Rance's eyes chiseled. You've been reading books above your station. My station is wherever my boys stand, Sable said. Jericho cleared his throat like a man drawing a line with sound. You brought a deputy? He asked, not looking away from Rance's face. On cue, a badge winked from the street. Deputy Finch, a thin man who wore his uniform like it might tell him who he was. He climbed down from his horse with the precise dignity of borrowed authority. "Mornin', Bram," he said. "Mornin', miss." He nodded at Sable as if he had been taught to tack courtesy on like a button and wasn't sure it would hold. Rance's grin warmed. "Deputy can relieve you of that child and your poor arithmetic," he said to Sable. "You and your ranch friend can file feelings at the clerk's desk." Sable held out the folded page Sheriff Tolliver had given her. Ink still crisp as truth spoken fresh. "Our names are written where your kind can't erase," she said. "Wardship under decent protection. Witnessed yesterday, signed yesterday. Your paper is a wish. Mine is a record." Finch accepted the page, like a man who wished it were lighter, and read with his lips moving. His mouth tugged sideways, the expression of someone finding a door he didn't know existed. "This says these boys are under Sheriff Tolliver's ward program," he muttered. "This says removal without due process is theft under county code." Rance's voice flattened. "We're in the country. Codes dim in sunlight." "Laws don't choose the weather," Jericho said. "Some men do." Finch looked between the two of them, and then to Kit, whose shoulder had begun to tremble under the duster's fingers. Finch knew a boy pretending not to be frightened. He knew it because he'd been one, and the memory lived in his bones like the ache that predicts rain. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Lyle," he said, "you'll release the child to his declared protectors pending a hearing." Rance's smile didn't move, but something cold stepped inside it. "Deputy," he said softly, "I thought we were friendly." "Friendly isn't the same as stupid," Finch answered, surprising himself with the courage that arrived when the script ran out. "Release him." The duster lifted his hand from Kit's shoulder like he'd been told the boy. Skin burned. Kit stepped across the threshold between trouble and its edge, and Jericho's hand landed on his shoulder with the pressure of a promise, not a claim. Kit went past him to Sable, who didn't clutch, didn't shake, just set her palm to his cheek, one heartbeat, then dropped it. The boy exhaled a sound that had needed to be freed for months. Rance folded his paper very carefully into squares, each crease a threat he intended to cash later. "We'll see you at the hearing," he said. "We'll bring men who read finer than a farmhand and a widow. When the county counts votes and favors, you'll find the scale tips how it always does." "Maybe," Sable said, "or maybe the scale-s been waiting for someone to stay and put a finger on truth." Rance tipped his hat toward Kit in an obscene parody of affection. "You nearly spared your brother trouble," he said. "Shame your friends believe in books." He swung into the saddle with the athleticism of vanity and wheeled his horse. Dust rose like a small surrender, and then settled where it always does, on the people who keep standing. Finch handed the paper back to Sable. His eyes had lost their borrowed shine and gained something smaller and more honest. "I'll ride ahead," he said, "and warn Tolliver you're bringing a storm he'll actually want." He touched his hat brim and left without swagger. Sable turned to Kit. "Next time," she said, "you wake me before you try heroism on an empty stomach." "Yes, ma'am," he said. The ma'am wasn't obedience. It was respect choosing a word it could carry. Brant had climbed onto the window seat to watch without being seen. Now he launched himself into Sable's side like a small cannonball and stuck there, his face hard against her ribs. She let him press until the apology leaked out through bone and into the earth, where apologies do the most good. Jericho opened the gate and let the quiet in like a guest. "Breakfast got cold while we were busy being law-abiding," he said. "I'll scramble eggs to apologize." They ate at the table like people who understood that forks were weapons too, the kind that heal faster than they harm. No one mentioned the way Kit's hand shook when he buttered bread. No one mentioned how Sable's eyes stayed too bright for the hour. After, Jericho stacked plates and Sable stacked plans. "Town by 9, she said. "We register a formal complaint. We ask for a hearing date before Lyle can make mischief with clerks. We fetch a teacher, anyone who works with the county and remembers what a child looks like when he's not being counted, so it's not just our say-so." "Mrs. Ellery," Jericho said. "She taught my sister to read words that didn't want to be read. She can speak to what a boy needs." Sable nodded. "We also gather witnesses who've seen Lyle collect boys for wages, not mercy." Jericho scratched his jaw. "Nate Harper at the livery," he said slowly. "He took in 2 placed boys last winter. Said they worked 20 hours and got paid in scripture. They ran the first thaw and hid in my north pasture until I found them. I fed them and pointed them to Arizona. I told myself I'd do more next time." "Next time's here," Sable said. They moved. Movement is mercy you give yourself. Sable set Kit to sweep and Brant to watch the pot so the beans wouldn't boil over their temper. She combed Kit's hair with her fingers and tied Brant's ribbon knot better than she had the night before. She looked at Jericho and saw the way he watched the boys with an expression she had no name for yet, because names catch too little of some things. On the road, the wagon's wheels found the same ruts as yesterday. Patterns are promises if you keep them. Sable kept her breathing even and did not look at fences like cages. Jericho drove with the steadiness of a river that knows its banks. The boys sat where they could see the world and be seen by it without apology. Town had the loud of men who think their words cover the street like boards. Sable ignored the porch talk and headed for the schoolhouse first. Mrs. Ellery opened the door with chalk on her fingers and a reading book tucked under her arm, like a shield. "Jericho Bram," she said, pleasure and worry knotted into the same rope. "You look like the kind of trouble I'd choose." Jericho tipped his hat towards Sable. "Miss Whitlow, Mrs. Ellery," he said. "We need an adult who remembers being one." "Rare species," Mrs. Ellery said. She crouched to the boy's height, her eyes serious without being sour. "You two like letters?" she asked. "They bite, but only at first." Kit nodded, unable to quite hide his interest. Brant scowled on instinct, and then scowled at his scowl, which was progress. Sable explained the hearing. She didn't waste words. Mrs. Ellery's mouth tightened at Rance's name. "I've had 3 girls placed in kitchens by that man in as many months," she said flatly. "They learn how to wipe more than they learn how to write. I'll speak to that." Next, the livery. Nate Harper smelled like hay and regret. He spat into the dirt and drew a line through it with his boot toe. "I ain't proud," he said when he heard the story. "I knew better than to take Lyle's placements. But the ledger wanted mercy more than my conscience did, and I didn't argue with it. I'll argue today." He took off his hat and mangled it, and then put it back on with the stubborn neatness of a man who wants to do one thing right to start the hour. They collected 2 more voices. A laundress whose son had disappeared and returned with a scar and a stare. A cowhand who carried a broken tooth he named Lyle's Tithe. By the time they stepped into the sheriff's office, Sable felt the story swelling behind her, not like a mob, but like a choir about to sing the note that breaks glass. Sheriff Tolliver listened, pencil tapping, mustache twitching, when the words placed and ledger came too close together. "Hearing at noon, town hall," he said at last. "Deputy Finch will escort you, which is to say he'll keep anyone from escorting you where you'd rather not go." He rubbed his eyes. "Sometimes the county is a patient with a sickness that looks like health to the patient. You bring me symptoms, I'll try not to misdiagnose." Noon came dressed in heat and expectation. The hall filled with men who liked the sound of their own boots and women who had learned to laugh without opening their mouths. Rance arrived late enough to imply importance, with two clean-shaven men in fine suits that made their necks look fragile. He took a seat near the front and didn't bother to hide his pleasure at the show. Tulliver banged a gavel as if the noise might reset the town's spine. "We hear the case of guardian wardship versus indenture placement for the Whitlow boys," he announced. "We also hear the broader complaint of misuse of placement law by one Rance Lyle for private enrichment. Speak truth and speak it plain." Rance's lawyer, because that's what the clean shave and the fragile neck meant, stood first. He talked like a man unrolling a rug, covering the floor with patterns meant to distract you from the hole beneath. He spoke of the county's burden, of idle hands, of the kindness of order. He held up Lyle's papers like scripture and never once looked at Kit or Brant. "Thank you," Tulliver said when the lawyer ran out of carpet. "Miss Whitlow?" Sable stood. Her palms were dry, which surprised her enough to make her smile. "The law isn't a basket you scoop children with," she said. "It's a fence that keeps wolves out. If you keep moving the post to fit a man's pocket, don't you dare call it a fence. Call it what it is. A theft that remembers to say, 'Please,' so it can pretend to be polite." She placed Sheriff's ward paper on the table. "We registered the boys under protection before Lyle came to our gate. The only due process he recognizes is whatever process is due to his purse. Ask the laundress how her boy came back. Ask the liveryman how many hours a child worked for a prayer. Ask the schoolteacher how many placements return with letters instead of bruises. If you can count even one, I'll sit down and be quiet. If you can't, I suggest we write a new note under this law, that it serves mercy before it serves men." Mrs. Ellery's testimony was a scalpel, not a hammer. Nate Harper's was a confession that tried its hand at redemption. The laundress wept only once, and it wasn't tea when she spoke of the scar. It was when she said her boy no longer muttered in his sleep. Deputy Finch added his own thin rope to the braided line, detailing the morning at Jericho's gate without adornment. "No one threatened the child," he said, "but a hand on a small shoulder can be a threat if it was attached to a purpose that is wrong." Rance rose at last, furious in the way of men who have never had to pick their own anger up off the ground. "You till change the way business is done because one woman doesn't like how her road turned," he sneered. "You till bankrupt a dozen ranches that rely on the law us help to keep hands on the plow." Jericho stood. He didn't look at Rance. He looked at the room, the men whose hands were more callous than skin, the women whose backs knew the weight of water more than the taste of it. "Any ranch that can keep its post set without stealing children isn't a ranch," he said. "It's a graveyard waiting for names. I'm not afraid of work. I'm afraid of forgetting what the work is for." Silence stood up then, tall and bristling. Tulliver weighed it and banged his gavel once out of respect. "The court finds that the Whitlow boys remain under ward protection, with Miss Whitlow and Jericho Bram as guardians ad litem," he pronounced. "Further, the court suspends all Lyle-sponsored placements pending a review of financial arrangements associated with said placements. Mr. Lyle, turn in your current docket to my office. Try to hide even one paper, and you'll find yourself sleeping in a room with a lock that doesn't have your name on it." Rance's face went pale enough to make his mustache look ridiculous. He tried to speak and found no purchase. His lawyer touched his elbow in the universal gesture of men who realize a horse has decided not to wear the saddle today. Outside, the town rearranged itself around the news the way ants do when a stick disturbs them, efficient, undismayed by surprise. Sable took 2 steps and finally let herself breathe all the way, a luxury she'd put off so often she'd forgotten what it cost. Brant tugged her sleeve. "Does that mean we can go home?" he asked. Home, Sable thought, a word she'd put away like a wedding dress, folded too long in a chest that smelled of camphor and unspent days. She looked at Jericho. He wasn't smiling in triumph. He was looking down at Kit and Brant like a man checking the level on a foundation he planned to build on. "It means we can go where our names fit," she said, "if Jericho still wants us." He held her gaze. "I want what we just built, on paper and in the yard," he said. "Stay, work, eat what we earn. Sleep in the big bedroom for as long as you need to believe it's yours. When you don't need to believe anymore, because you know, we'll talk about rooms." Sable felt her throat tighten. She nodded because words can break when you lean too hard on them. They drove home through an afternoon that kept its promises mostly by keeping out of the way. At the ranch, Sable fed the bottle calf, who butted with renewed vigor and fell asleep with milk on her mouth like a blessed fool. The boys ran the fence line and argued about which post was the straightest. Jericho fixed the porch step that had been loose since memory. None of it was grand. All of it was what living feels like when it returns to a body that feared it had been evicted. Evening gathered around the edges of the yard without being invited, which is how good company behaves. Sable washed up, combed her hair, and stood in the doorway of the big bedroom. Clean sheets, that was Jericho's doing. Window latch repaired, his hand there too. The ribbon she'd tied, cut last night, lay on the dresser, ends even now. She picked it up and tied it again, not at her throat, but around the bedpost. A reminder. We choose what holds us. "Ma'am," came a small voice, Brant hovering. "Do we still have to whisper?" "Only if we in the house of a man who doesn't deserve our voices," Sable said. "This is not that house." Brant grinned with two missing teeth and threw himself onto the bed he had earned with fear and with standing still, when standing still was the bravest move. Kit followed more dignified, but checked that the closet door moved smooth. He shook it once, just to be sure he could open it fast. Then he let it rest. Sable watched and didn't interfere. She knew rituals when she saw them. Jericho leaned against the frame with a fresh nervousness he hid badly. "I was thinking," he said, "about the job offer I made with my mouth half full of beans. It stands. Foreman needs a forewoman. Calves don't wean themselves. Boys need someone who can say no to them without saying no to themselves." "You offering wages or a charity disguised as wages?" Sable asked softly. "Wages," Jericho said, "and shares if the herd does what I think it can this year. You call the shots in the yard, I'll call them in the field. We'll argue in the kitchen where the knives are handy but pointed at onions." Sable startled herself by laughing. The sound felt like a bucket of creek water upended after a day in dust, shocking and right. "I'll take the job," she said. "We'll write terms. On paper, you and I are both old friends with men who like to change the rules after the pot ace in the middle." He nodded, relieved and something else. He took a half-step closer and then stopped, as if he were teaching his own feet patience. "There's something else," he said. "I'm not a man with secrets, but I've got a story I don't tell often." "Tell it like you want me to keep it or share it," Sable said. Jericho stared at his hands for the length of a breath. "I married once," he said. "Short. She died longer than she lived with me. Fever doesn't negotiate. The empty didn't either. I thought I'd used up the part of me that makes room. Turns out I only boarded it over. Today you pried loose a couple of planks. Doesn't mean I'm asking for anything that has more rules than a meal, but I figure you should know what rattles when I walk." Sable reached out and touched the bedpost ribbon. "Thank you," she said. "I've got rattles too. We'll listen for each other. We won't mistake rattles for snakes unless they bite." They got as far as grinning at each other like fools who didn't care they were being foolish before a clatter from the yard snapped all the easy in half. Kit appeared in the doorway, breathless. "Riders," he said. "3. Not Lyle. One's got a preacher collar. One's got a book with a red ribbon hanging from it. They're headed straight for the gate like they own it." Sable's mind went to Dry Comet, to a preacher who liked overflow more than brim, to the way men used God like a blade when they were tired of using arguments. She felt the old dread reach for her, and she stepped sideways, so it missed. "Boys in the kitchen," she said calmly. "Jericho." He had the rifle in his hand before she finished his name. "Beside you," he answered. "Not in front." They met the riders in the yard. The man with the collar was the sort who wore cloth like armor. The book carrier was the clerk from Dry Comet, Mr. Arlo, who smelled of ink and worry. The third was a rancher from 2 valleys over, hard-eyed, hungry at the edges, hat brim curled like a sneer. "Miss Whitlow," the preacher said, voice sweet with rot. "You ran off with souls needing guidance. God delights in lost sheep, but he prefers them returned to the fold." "God and I understand each other," Sable said. "He knows I don't bring children back to wolves." Arlo cleared his throat. "Miss Whitlow, I came because I was sent," he said. "I stamped a paper at Lyle's request last month. It was not the right paper for the right cause. I can undo my stamp. I can testify. I can make trouble for Lyle with men who count their coins by how they look in the mirror." The preacher's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Arlo," he warned. "Enough," Jericho said, not loud but final. "This is my yard. State your business that isn't confession and go." The hard-eyed rancher spat where he thought it would stain. "Heard you put a stop to placements," he said to Jericho. "We got a harvest of mesquite posts, needs setting. Boys could earn a boot without a heel among us. You get between us and ours, you'll find how quick men forget you used to be neighborly. You want hands? Offer wages," Sable said. "You want children? Try honesty, and see if your mouth blister." The rancher glared. "You talk big for a woman who slept on a stranger's floor last night." Jericho took one step forward, and the yard felt the change the way a dog feels thunder. He looked at the man like he was deciding where to bury a fence post. "Your business is concluded," he said. "Any boy sets posts on my place will do it for money and for the lesson of a straight line. Your ranch can make its own ethics without stealing mine." The preacher tried one more time, that smile he used to stitch women into smaller sizes glinting. "Miss Whitlow, if you return to Dry Comet, the ladies' committee will—" Sable raised her hand, palm out. "I want to stand in a church where the pews are sorted by what a man pretends to be," she said. "Pilgrims can travel without asking permission." Arlo looked from one face to the next and made a decision that would change the way his shoes fit forever. He took the red-ribboned book from under his arm and held it out. "Placement ledgers," he said. "Payments to Lyle logged as donations from ranchers and storekeepers. Names of children placed, ages, hours. Some—" his voice snagged. "Some younger than these boys." Sable took the book as if it were a living thing that might promise to behave if you held it right. She turned to Jericho, who was already nodding. "Sheriff," he said. "Now." The preacher tried to snatch the ledger. Jericho's hand moved, and the rifle butt lifted just enough to remind anyone watching that bone should prefer not to meet wood at speed. The rancher swore and spun his horse. Arlo stayed. They rode for town again, wagon rocking under the weight of a book that was heavier than it looked. Tolliver met them halfway, Finch a pace behind, both wearing the expressions of men who have been waiting for a chance to do the right thing in a way that would stick. Arlo testified on the street rather than in the hall so the whole town could overhear by accident. He pointed to columns and named names and did not spare his own. Tolliver took the ledger like a judge accepting a newborn, sober and tender. He walked Rance to the jail with a hand on his elbow and a quiet that made even men who liked noise hold their tongues. By the time the sun laid itself down, the town had a different center of gravity. Work still waited, hunger still watched with the patience of a stray. But the scale had a new weight in one pan, a book full of secrets turning into light. Home again. Sable put the boys to bed in the big room, and they slept with the kind of snoring that sounds like the soul sweeping up after a party. She and Jericho stood in the kitchen with cups between them and a silence that didn't need fixing. "I didn't know if we could win," Jericho said finally. "I hoped, I fought, but I didn't know." "Me neither," Sable said. "I just knew running was a smaller losing." She set her cup down and touched the ribbon on the post again. "Tomorrow I take the boys to the schoolhouse in the morning, then to the creek to throw stones at nothing until their shoulders learn a new memory. After dinner, I'll walk the fence with you and learn which posts lie about being upright." "After supper," Jericho corrected with a smile. "Dinner's at noon on this place. If I'm going to make you forewoman, I have to start with what we call things." "Terms," Sable said. "We'll write them after the boys sleep." They wrote with their shoulders almost touching, drafting a labor contract that named duties and shares and what their mouths would not call charity. They put in a clause that made them both grin like they were stealing peaches. In case of dispute, the calf decides. It was foolish. It was perfect. They both signed and left space for the boys to add their marks when they felt like making promises that big. When they finished, Jericho didn't move away. "One more thing," he said. "I've got a spare key for the front door. I can nail it to a beam. Or I can give it to you." Sable took the key. It was heavy and plain. She closed her hand around it until it left an impression. "I'll keep it," she said. "Not because I don't believe you, because I like the way it feels to have choices." A knock at the door, sharp, businesslike, not the preacher, not fear. Sable and Jericho looked at each other with the pleasure of people who can meet knocks together now. Jericho opened it. Mrs. Ellery stood there with a girl of about 10 at her side, eyes like a pond that had seen a storm and was taking a breath. "This is Lark," Mrs. Ellery said without preface. "Ledger says she was placed. We say she was stolen. Her aunt died 2 months ago, and the rancher who took her in lost his taste for charity when he found she reads Latin better than she churns. She heard the hearing and walked away. She didn't know where else to go." Sable crouched so their eyes were level. "We go forward from here," she told Lark. "No one asks you to explain how you got here unless you want to. No one counts your value by how many hours you can stand without sitting." Lark swallowed. "Do you have a room?" "We have a big bedroom," Sable said. "It used to be too big." She looked up at Jericho, who was already nodding. "Now it's coming into shape." Footsteps pounded from down the hall. Kit, alert as a coyote. Brant, hair sticking up like a thistle. "Who's that?" Brant demanded, halfway too offended that someone had knocked after bedtime. "A girl who can read Latin," Sable said, "which means she can teach you to read English twice as fast." Brant's offense broke into wonder. "Teach me a word right now," he insisted. Lark thought, then offered, "Fortis." She glanced at Mrs. Ellery. "It means strong." Sable felt the word land in the room like a nail set true. "Fortis," she repeated. "Good first word for a house." She turned to Mrs. Ellery. "We've room until the county arranges something better that we all agree is better. If Lark wants to stay longer than until, we'll redraw our contract and add a new clause." Jericho's mouth tilted. "In case of dispute, the children decide," he amended. "Even the ones who can read Latin." A laugh moved around the kitchen like a friendly wind, aloud because it came after the work. They warmed milk and split a biscuit that had survived the day and called it a feast because feasts are about timing, not plates. Later, when the house had settled and the night had taken its seat like an old friend who knows when to keep quiet, Sable stood again at the big bedroom door, 4 small breaths overlapping, the ribbon on the post, new knot, her key heavy in her pocket. Jericho's step in the hall, steady as a metronome. She lay down on the rug because habits are honest even when they're ready to be retired. Then she stood back up and smoothed the spread and slid under it because growth is honest too. She left a palm-wide lane of emptiness down the middle, as you do when you teach your life to make room for more without presuming what that more will be. A loose board on the porch creaked, the same one Jericho had planned to fix tomorrow. Sable listened, counted, measured. The creak came again, not footstep, but weight. She was up before the third sound, knife in hand, because some rituals can live beside growth without arguing. She reached the door as someone slid a folded paper under it. Not rants. He wouldn't use doors to talk if he could use them to take. Sable bent, picked up the paper, unfolded it with the neat care one uses for snakes and truths. 3 words, written in a hand she recognized from the ledger. Count the mothers. Jericho read over her shoulder, his jaw set. Arlo, he guessed. Or someone using his ink, Sable said. She turned the paper. On the back a list of names, not boys, women. The ones who signed away children under pressure they later called mercy because it hurt less than calling it fear. Addresses, crosses next to some. Sable's chest went cold and very clear. Tomorrow after chores, she said, we ride, we listen, we say the word fortis wherever it's been forgotten. We fix what we can before men like Lyle rename it. She looked toward the bedroom where 4 children breathed a harmony they hadn't known they were capable of. We're not done. We're just well begun. Jericho looked at her, the way a man looks at a horizon he didn't know he was riding toward until it arrived. Bound to be a long day, he said. Good, I've got bread to take with us. He touched the ribbon on the bedpost. She touched the key in her pocket. Somewhere in the yard, the bottle calf bawled in her sleep, a small trumpet saying, I live. Sable smiled into the dark. We all do, she whispered. Now. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.